States and to fulfill the next phase that he talked about in terms of black economic empowerment?
Yeah, it's never redundant, I think, to remind the American people that King was not the dreamer that they try to cast him to be. It's what Dr. West calls him. You hear me quoting Dr. West often because he is my dear and abiding friend. I think the nation's leading public intellectual. We have these debates, sometimes debates, more often just conversations all the time. And Dr. West has coined a term that I've heard others use, but it comes from him, and only Cornel West could think of this, but it's what he calls the Santa Clausification of Dr. King. That is Wesleyan to the core. The Santa Clausification of Dr. King. What he means by that is that we have so tamed and defamed and manicured Dr. King, we've taken all the power out of his message by making him this happy, jolly old man sitting back with a dream, and nobody wants to be offended by or challenged by or unsettled by what he said. Now, Dr. West would say that in his own words better than what I just said. But at the end of the day, Dr. King gave his life here in Memphis, fighting for poor people. The President of the United States right now has a bust in the Oval Office. I celebrate the fact when he got elected, he took out of the Oval Office a bust of Winston Churchill and replaced it with a bust of Dr. King. It's a beautiful thing. I am so glad to see Dr. King's bust in the Oval Office. I'm more delighted to see that in just a few days from now, the man gunned down in this city will be celebrated as the first person of color, the first African American to be honored with a monument on the Mall in Washington. And I know it's going to be a glorious day for those of us who think that Dr. King was an iconic American. And yet, that monument is really about brick and mortar. King was about flesh and blood and bone. And so it's never lost on me when I come to this town what he gave his life for. What we need to do is to pick up where Dr. King left off, with a poor people's movement, a poor people's campaign. That's what he was doing. On this poverty tour, we went to Chicago. We went to the apartment where King stayed, the actual spot on the apartment where King and his wife and kids stayed when he moved up to Chicago to get some traction on this poor people's campaign. So the bottom line is we need to pick up where he left off, and that means, 1, making poor people a priority. 2, getting some legislation out of Washington that reflects the fact that we really do believe that they're a priority. When we set a priority in Washington, things get done. I'm glad Congressman Cohen is here. He agrees with us on this. When we set a priority on things that matter, we get things done. I hate this debt ceiling legislation we just passed. With all respect to the President and Congress, we raised the ceiling, but now there's a hole in the floor. Right. And poor people are going to fall through that hole. There's no reason in the world why we can't prioritize poverty. No reason that we can't prioritize poverty and then sit down and have a White House conference on poverty, a White House conference on poverty, and find a way to eradicate poverty in 10, 15, 25 years in this country. And there's so many plans, so many ways to do that, but to get to that, somebody's got to make eradicating poverty a priority.
A couple more questions for you, and then Dr. West, and then Congressman Cohen. I'm glad you brought up POTUS. That was my next question. You've received a lot of immature and insecure pushback from our brothers and sisters concerning your frank observation. What do black folk in America need to learn about, to coin the phrase from James Brown, what do we need to learn about living in America that will help us be more mature about how we deal with our president?
Yeah, I understand the love that black folk have for Barack Obama. I have that same love. I'm delighted as anybody else to see him elected. I was sitting, my TV show, of course, is on PBS every night, but on the election night, I was asked by Brian Williams and Tom Brokaw to sit between them on the NBC anchor desk to call the election night coverage. Honored to be asked by these two icons in media, Brokaw and Williams, to sit between the two of them. But more honored when NBC made the call that Barack Obama be elected president, that they came to me first to ask my assessment of what has just happened. I will never forget, as long as I live, that question and the answer that I gave that I won't bore you with now. But I've been as moved by the symbolism of this presidency as anybody else. But symbolism alone won't cut it. It's not just about symbolism, it's got to be about substance. And the sad reality is, and folks don't want to hear this, Barack Obama could not ask black Americans today what many politicians ask when they run for re-election. He cannot pose to black people this question: are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? He can't ask that question right now, because the data, the evidence, doesn't yield the kind of answer that would help one get reelected. So all we're saying is that great presidents aren't born, they're made. They got to be pushed into their greatness. There is no Abraham Lincoln without Frederick Douglass pushing him. There is no FDR without A. Philip Randolph pushing him. There is no LBJ without MLK pushing him. If we want Obama to be a great president, not just another garden variety politician, if we want him to be a transformative president, we got to push him into his greatness. You do that with respect.